Good morning, gang. Thank you for joining me for Tai Chi Basics video 2. Today's quote comes from Hua To, who was one of the earlier physicians in traditional Chinese medicine. And he stated that a man's body must have exercise, but it should never be done to the point of exhaustion, which is incredibly important when we think about the risk of overuse and what constant fatigue does to our bodies on the inside and out. So this is hopefully a good way to help find a way to keep exercising often while avoiding that overuse and chronic fatigue feeling. Today's principles are going to include the 70-30 principle, the Yin-Yang principle, and the empty and full or empty and solid principles. As well as this video will include the 4 traditional stances that are commonly encountered in our Tai Chi practice. Returning to the principles and beginning with the 70-30 principle, it is practiced by not locking your joints in either full extension or full flexion. You should always have some measure of available movement in each stance. This available movement allows for maintenance of your balance, as well as acceptance and management of any external forces. For the martial aspect of it, since it's always present really, if you overextend your arms or your knees, it gives the opponent a solid lever to take you off balance with. Much like if you always lock your knees out when you go into stance during walking, or always look for that extended locked feeling because you're unsure of the position of your joints, is commonly going to wear your joints out more and then also cause you to lose your balance more frequently. So you want to always maintain that little bit of extra room. And you only need about 70% of it at the most. So even if your joints don't allow for good movement, you can still obtain many benefits from practice within that limited range of motion. The Yin-Yang principle is a universal principle that is always striving for balance in all things. Much like how our bodies try to strive for homeostasis on the inside, between balancing out our sodium and our potassium, looking for those changes in the brain between the various neurotransmitters that have balancing relationships with each other. It's important to know that you cannot have one without the other, because if you do so, balance is not maintained and the systems do not work as well as they typically would. Anybody that has experienced low potassium before understands how dangerous that could potentially be. Other representations of the Yin-Yang principle and everything around us would be how Yin is negative and yet Yang is positive. How the Yin is soft and the Yang is rigid or hard. And in traditional imagery, the river is Yin while the mountain is Yang. And that balance always gives and takes. It's an ebb and flow, much like the tides. The third principle we're going to talk about is the empty and full principle, or the empty and solid principle. And this principle guides our movements and dictates the weight shifting and step taking during Tai Chi practice. It's represented in the single whip as we step out, where the full leg or our support leg bears all the weight as the opposite foot moves away from the body, and can be practiced quite frequently with the empty step, or empty stance, or the toe stance. Speaking of the stances, the 4 stances we will be discussing today, and with a little demonstration of, are the horse stance, the toe stance, the empty stance, and the bow stance. Each one is commonly encountered, and many of them we already kind of know just from our observations of martial arts, or even our practice in our Tai Chi classes already. The horse stance is typically a wide squat and is typically low. However, some styles have a higher stance height. Chin style Tai Chi is typically in a very low stance, and the traditional horse stance is best represented in that. Whereas in Sun style, the horse stance is much higher. The toe stance is performed with one foot being flat and the other foot being on the toes. Your feet are narrow in stance and can be challenging if your balance is not very good, but it can also be a good way to develop your balance. External support is encouraged if your balance is not very strong. The empty stance is when all your weight is on one foot, or the supporting leg, and the empty foot is away from your body with just light contact of the heel on the ground. The important thing is to make sure you don't collapse into your stances when you're working on them or moving between them. And then finally, the bow stance is the one that's typically your attacking posture for all you martial arts minded folks. The back foot is generally toed out 45 degrees from midline of the body and bears approximately 30% of the weight, whereas your forefoot is in more straight alignment with the midline of the body and the foreknee, and typically bears about 70% of the weight. And you can really develop a good sense of your weight shift by shifting onto and off of the forefoot to develop that control and what those pressures feel like. Speaking of practicing our stances, you should always attempt to relax into the stance while you're performing them and avoid collapsing into them. Collapsing and relaxing are totally different occurrences. It's a good idea to start at about a 1 minute hold time for each stance and work your way up into as long as you can maintain the stance with the goal of it being 1 hour. That seems like a lot, but it develops quite a bit of static strength and really allows you to become more connected with your body and your postural maintenance. As you practice your stances and become more comfortable and familiar with them, incorporate Dantian breathing whenever possible. That way you can promote that relaxed sensation during the stance and really maintaining that control while developing your coordination. It is generally considered that serious practice is 1 hour a day, whereas casual practice is an hour and a half a week. So there's a lot of room in there to develop your practice somewhere between the two. I'm going to demonstrate the stances now and really allow the opportunity for you to observe them and take note of where the body alignments are. Beginning with the horse stance first, we step out into a wide stance and let the heel or our feet toe out a bit so our knees can travel away from the midline as we lower down. This is a great activity for working on that upright posture with the bent knee that is addressed in the first video. And the goal is to hold it out as long as you can. Another good incorporation is post stance, which is holding your hands like this, or stake stance. And this is typically the goal at all times. And you just want to maintain this stance for as long as you can. Trying to maintain your breath as you go and not forcing it and not collapsing into it, but being supported and firm the entire time. Transitioning from horse stance into toe stance would be something very similar to this. Most of the weight is bore by the support leg and my toes are on the ground here and I'm pressing into the floor a bit. When practicing your toe stance, be sure you spend time on each foot, letting the opposite foot be your support and flat while you get the toes of the other foot down. Again, your feet are very narrow here, so it's easy to lose your balance if your balance isn't very strong. And if you need support to practice, please do so. Stepping from the toe stance into empty stance would be very much like going into the single whip in our Tai Chi practice, where we're full on one side and we just get light heel contact on the other side on the floor. But this leg is always full of our weight and pressure. And it's good to practice this also on both sides, so you're always available to move to either left or right and not over-dependent on one side. Maintaining that balance, not just in the sense of balance, but also the balance in how we move and how we can move. The final stance we'll be covering is the bow stance. And my back foot will be toed 45 degrees from the midline of my body, whereas the forefoot is in line with the midline of my body, straight ahead. My weight is over my forefoot for the majority of it, and I just have it on the back just to help maintain my balance. If you toe in, this will make your balance harder to maintain, especially left and right. So the toe out is very helpful in providing that extra stability as you advance or potentially retreat back. And by practicing this weight shift slowly, you can become really aware of what does my weight feel like on my feet. And much like the other stances prior to this, you want to practice with the opposite foot being the forefoot and vice versa. So you have that balance and sensation and awareness between the two. Also, if you have any tightnesses, this helps to address them and keep your hips flexible and limber for your movements. And as I mentioned earlier, incorporate the Dantian breathing whenever possible. Really connect with those postures and be aware of what does your body tend to do when you're entering or exiting them. Help yourself regain that control. I hope everybody finds these videos helpful in refining their practice, and I look forward to having class in person with you all again soon. Thank you again for joining me today. Have a great day. Stay safe out there. Until the next time.